Kevin.
Special delivery.
Right.
13-year-olds are good for something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What are you drinking? What are you drinking?
That is my personal favorite. This is Stride. It is a bone dry wildflower honey mead. It's supposed to be finished out at 0.996. It is bone dry. It's easy. You can take it to the beach because it's canned.
Right.
Nice.
I like that.
That's what's
I like
up,
that.
man. Yes, indeed. So I think we technically, yeah. Go ahead, right? What you got, Drew?
No, I was just gonna say, what are you drinking? I know you just.
I was
polished off a
drinking,
double,
yeah. I did cuts from the vine, little sort of seasonal that we were producing a little bit ago. I don't think it's available anymore, but kind of featuring the hops from a couple of farms that our brewers really, really enjoy working with. So Van Horn Farms and Jackson Hop Farms. So really just kind of like highlighting those hops in this particular one here, but. Yeah, it's a pretty good brew, man. I'm enjoying it. I'm discovering myself to be I didn't think I liked IPAs until I got into the craft beer space and had access to all the different ways that you can enjoy an IPA. I'm like, we got hazy doubles, we got doubles, we got triples. I'm like, man, this is crazy. Hold on now.
And I love it when you're like, oh, that's really fruity. Like, oh, there's no fruits. Like,
yeah, exactly. Exactly. No fruit whatsoever, brother. That is the hops doing that magic. Yeah, it's been fantastic. I can't wait. I'm excited about having Inga on here. I'm like, I don't know what you about. She looked like she was about to take a sip. Hold on. I don't want to catch you mid-sip. Like you about to. No sips for you? Okay. Oh, okay. She drinking coffee out the Howard mug. I got it. You're on mute, sis.
I'm a lambic person.
Oh. Is
right.
that what you're on right now? Lambics?
Not currently, no.
Okay.
Not at the moment. But
not at the moment. Right.
So I was listening to you all discuss, and yeah, that's my preference.
Right on.
There's some delicious lambics out there, and that's another one. I feel like when people get into craft beer, it's like, what is this? And you tell them what it is, like, and they try it, like, whoa, all right. Like, all right.
Straight up.
Yeah. There's some good ones out there.
Oh, they got a little I like this platform. I never worked on this platform. They got a little countdown in the top left corner letting us know when we're going live.
It's a count up.
Yeah, hold on.
It's a count up. It's a count up.
I'm like, wait a minute. Actually, hold on. That's not helpful at all.
Now, Fenwick, we're still live.
Fair enough. But she told us 7:15 was the official start, so I'm gonna go with that.
All right.
So right at 7:15, we're gonna properly kick it off.
For sure.
Okay.
And I guess I'm doing the introductions. We don't have anybody on here to sort of introduce our panel, so I'm gonna jump right in, and I'm gonna have y'all introduce yourselves, just so you know. But I'm gonna introduce the panel itself.
All right.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Me.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, we are right at 7:15, folks, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Very excited to be here, joined by some old and some new friends. Got Andrew Magana from Odell Brewing, my man Kevin Martin from Good Road Cider Works. We got Inga Willis with us from Ed Forum and the Propel Center, and the one and only Isaiah Smith from Our Culture Brewery, joining us for this conversation where we're going to be talking about putting DEI principles into practice, pushing the conversation beyond buzzwords, recognizing that DEI is something that's being tossed around in a lot of spaces. And we really want to spend some time in this conversation thinking through what that actually looks like in practice. How do we move beyond using this language as a smokescreen and really implementing solid practices to try to drive change inside of our industry and across industries. But before we get into the specifics of the conversation, I figured it would be meet for us to start with some introductions. So I'm going to work through the panelists, and I'm going to start with my top right. Y'all don't know who that is, but I'm going to have Andrew start us off. And I'm going to ask y'all to, each of you in turn, to answer 3 questions, essentially, right? Like one of them is not really a question, but I want you to sort of introduce us to you. Tell us a little bit about you, sort of where you are, where you're coming from. Kind of the platform from which you're speaking on today. And then tell us, secondly, about your introduction to craft. Like, how did you get into this space? And then the third question, and hopefully all of you are taking notes, but I'm happy to repeat this, is what brings you to this particular conversation? So what about your background and your current experiences lends itself to you being a part of this conversation around DEI? So introduction to you, tell us about your introduction to craft, and then lastly, what brings you to this conversation on today? And like I said, we're gonna start with Andrew, not because we're going in alphabetical order, but we're gonna go in order on my screen.
Hey, I appreciate it, fam. Good to see you, and good to see all y'all. It's nice. If you ever want a good story, ask how me and Isaiah first met. It's a good one. I'll break it down for you. But anyway, my name is Andrew Magana. I work at Odell Brewing Company. I work out of our main brewery, which is in Fort Collins, Colorado. I hail from, born and raised in the great state of Missouri. Went to school at the University of Missouri, MIZ. Anybody out there? And so yeah, I lived there most of my life, and then actually I've been in Colorado for the last 9 years. So that's kind of where I'm from. I got into craft beer before I worked in craft beer. I worked in higher education. So I worked for a women's college out in Missouri called Stevens College for a while, and then I also worked at Colorado State University, which is located here in Fort Collins. I worked there for about 5 years, and I did international marketing and recruitment. And so working in higher education, I got a really great introduction into diversity, equity, inclusion work, as well as access, justice, what all these words mean. I'm going to paraphrase a lot here, but I feel like higher education went through what maybe craft beer is going through now, and like, oh, we need to find more people to come to our colleges instead of just the people who can afford it or that look like us and stuff. And so, higher education 20 years ago, 30 years ago is going through this. And so it's kind of baked into a lot of the processes, DE&I work. And so that was my first introduction to diversity, equity, inclusion work. When I knew I wanted to leave higher education, I wanted to work for a really great company that was local. And so I put in a lot of applications. Eventually, I got my opportunity here at Odell Brewing Company. Started on the sales team. Now I work in human resources doing talent acquisition as well as diversity, equity, inclusion. So that's my story.
Excellent. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. You kept it super tight, answered all 3 questions, set the bar super high. We're going to pass it on to my man, Kevin, and ask you same 3 questions, Kev. Introduction to you. Tell us about your introduction to craft, and then what brings you to the conversation.
Okay, I'm Kevin Martin. I am head of fermentation and part owner at Good Road Cider Works. I also do the lab work, the government stuff, and all the IT at Good Road. My introduction to craft was I was working at Microsoft back in '94. Sat in a brew pub with a coworker. Had some really expensive craft beer that was mediocre at best. They had a jar of ingredients sitting on a cabinet, and we decided we're going to get a kit. Went up the street, got that kit, made our first beers called Slobber. The beer is not as bad as its name, and it was okay. That second brew was a recipe we made up. The third brew was a mead because I saw it in Charlie Papazian's book. And that first mead was incredibly horrible. It became my white whale, and I went Captain Ahab on it. Started competing as an amateur and was in the top 3 mead maker and cider maker of the year for North Carolina about 14 years running, 4 times first place. Then let's see, that second question was how did I get into the industry?
Yeah.
23 years in IT. And then this opportunity came up. I got tired of getting laid off by other people. So I decided I was going to go ahead and move with a bunch of buddies from our brew club, of which I was pretty much the black person for like 13 years. So everybody knew me, but I had to try to remember everybody's name. So, that got to be pretty interesting. But we all got together and started this venture, and that ownership stake helped. And as part of that, which is a segue into the last part that brings me here, was being that brown person. Being the only one in the club, and now being an ownership stake in the business, I noticed that I didn't see a lot of faces like mine. And I don't see a lot of faces at the other venues coming in and sticking. And that kind of struck a nerve. So we participated in Marcus Baskerville's Black is Beautiful. We made a mead. We are also hosting an intern in the Many Faces initiative that's being spearheaded by Brian Quinn at Town Brewing. And we want to continue along those lines and try to help bring more faces of color and bring some diversity in, because I think there's only like 4% representation all around in this industry. And I know that there's Brothers Brewing because I talk to them all the time, but they don't feel comfortable in that space. And I want to help engender that. So that's what brings me here.
Right on. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that so much, man. I'm gonna pass it to my man Isaiah. Keep it going on the brew train before we get to Miss Inga and have Miss Inga round us out. But so Isaiah, introduction. Tell us about your intro to craft, and then what brings you to this conversation.
Exactly. So what's up, everybody? Isaiah Smith, CEO and co-founder of Our Culture Brewing Company, and also the president of Leaders of the Brew School. Shout out to all my leaders out there. We just rocking and rolling out here in the dirty South in Atlanta, and we got something to say. And so, my intro to craft, I started out as a consumer, and really gained an appreciation for what was inside the glass, and just the breadth and width of the different flavors and the variety. And one day, my brother and my best friend decided, let's take a class, let's see what this is about. Took a class, thought, is this it? This is all it takes? In our in our ignorance, not understanding all of the level of craftsmanship that goes into this. And so, we took a class, bought a kit the same day, brewed a batch of beer extract. Nobody got sick, and then we were bit by this bug. We were just kind of like blown away that we could make something that tasted good, and express ourselves, and we kind of enjoyed the process and spent a lot of time with it. So after that, we started just brewing all the time, and then one day we looked up and we had a keg, and nobody that brewed it had any. We had given it all away. People were asking for the beer and going like, hey, when y'all gonna brew this again? And the light bulb goes off in my head, and I'm like, okay, there's a little opportunity here. And upon trying to enter in from an entrepreneurial angle into the industry, doing a little research, seeing that, to Kevin's point, that we're such a small portion of the industry from a production standpoint, I saw a great opportunity for us on the production side to just have our voice out there. Instead of waiting for change, we decided to be the change and start Our Culture Brewing Company. And so in terms of, what brings me to this panel, what qualifies me to be here, I think it's the same thing that qualifies all of us, right? I'm a person that desires to see change, and I'm trying to make it different. And, any platform, any opportunity, any chance I get to bring that to reality, I'm all for it. And so that's the short and sweet of who I am and why we're here and what we're doing today.
Right on. I appreciate you, big brother. Thanks so much for sharing your story. Inga, you got to keep the train rolling, man. We got two folks now who had some craft and bought a kit and brewed some beer. Are you going to keep us rolling? Are you going to tell us about your kit purchase experience?
I am not, but I will definitely keep the train moving. It's wonderful to be with each of you this evening. I'm Inga Willis. I'm an Atlanta native. Live in Atlanta now. SWAT's in the building. I spent 15 years professionally in the entertainment business, actually. Started at LaFace Records and then received my education at Howard University in Washington, D.C. That industry was disrupted by technology. So I began to follow technological trends as a disruptor, knowing that if everyone thought CDs would never shift, we were blindsided, which impacted our revenue streams, et cetera. And then following technological trends, and as a keynote speaker in the HBCU circuit, I'm a 4th generation HBCU grad. It's my other passion. I now work with Ed Farm with the Propel Center. And so I'm designing comprehensive solutions via pipelines through our full ecosystem of HBCUs and community college cohorts as well to industry. And I believe that equity exists within the supply chain. I was introduced to craft through Jen Price and Atlanta Beer Boutique. I was familiar. I went to Paideia. I've been around beer drinkers and enthusiasts my entire life, but the power of representation, once I saw a Black woman passionate about it, I paid attention, and the color and life that she brought to educating those around her about the beauty of craft, and not only the beauty of it, the elements, the layers, the levels, it was like art. So I paid attention to it and embraced it. But more importantly, I'm here this evening because I believe equity is in supply chain. And I think that that is one of the ways that we can create change and be change makers, is to pipeline talent, all of the components. Perhaps everyone's not a brewer. Perhaps everyone is not the brand. But what about the other components that fuel the industry? And I believe that there's no greater talent pool than the ecosystem of historically Black colleges and universities. Thank you.
Man, look, as a fellow HBCU grad, I'm going to say thank you for what you're doing and the opportunities you're creating. XU in the building, Xavier University out of New Orleans, Louisiana.
Come on, Xavier.
New Orleans native here. I realized I did not introduce myself. I went straight to introducing y'all, which perhaps is in keeping with the spirit of DEI, right? Like making more room for others than for ourselves. So that was accidental and yet seems to have worked out in our favor. So I'll introduce myself before we keep going. And Fenwick Broyard, I'm the Vice President of Talent and Culture at Creature Comforts Brewing Company here in Athens, Georgia, currently based in Athens. Happy to be in this very small community working for this brewery that's absolutely making a difference in this town. My introduction to craft, I would say, came through Creature. I guess my introduction to what craft could be and what it could represent in a community came through Creature Comforts. My introduction to craft as a product came in very similar fashion to what some of you have described, just sitting down in a brew pub, having my first craft beer. For me, pumpkin beer was my introduction to craft beer. I didn't know that such a thing existed. I had a pumpkin beer, was like, I'm sold, this is amazing. Creature has yet to make a pumpkin beer, but I haven't given up hope yet that we will eventually. What brings me to this conversation, though, is really stepping into and really working with Creature Comforts prior to joining the staff. I was running a nonprofit organization here in Athens when Creature arrived in Athens, and discovered very early that this new business that had arrived in our community came with a different ethos than many of the other businesses that were already existing in our corporate ecosystem, that they came with a commitment to community. One of the 5 pillars upon which this business was established was community. And so having an opportunity to interact with them, we were introduced pretty early on. Myself and the CEO of Creature Comforts, Chris Herron, were introduced pretty early on. And from the beginning, I knew there was something special about this business, and have since come to discover that that uniqueness that I found to be true in Creature also rings true in the whole of this industry. That while this industry does have absolute opportunity to grow, there is a tremendous sense of community and collaboration, even amongst the direct competitors, that I see inside of craft that really inspires me when I think about what's possible for us. And so I'm excited to be a part of this conversation, because I think the next phase of development for craft is really leaning into this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making more space for people who look like us. I'm always when conversations like this are getting ready to start, and especially too, given the title of this panel, right? Like, we're recognizing that DEI currently is a buzzword, or I mean, those 3 letters now are a buzz acronym, I guess. I'd like to ask each of you, and I want to kind of parse those out, because I think those get lumped together and we talk about DEI as though diversity and equity and inclusion are the same thing. But before we get too far into the conversation, I kind of want to ask us to spend some time thinking about them separately. And I'm going to go sort of round robin. And Inga, if you don't mind, I might start with you and just ask you to speak into, like, let's establish a working definition for ourselves. Let's have everybody talk, like, what is diversity, first of all? What is equity, and what is inclusion, as distinct from one another, but then also as principles that sort of like interact with each other and reinforce one another? But really to think of these things as three separate realities that we're pursuing. So what is diversity, what is equity, and what is inclusion, in your opinion, as separate standalone things that we should be pursuing?
Well, I think, simply put, we're talking about presence, fairness, and ownership. Period. I yield back my time.
No, you can't do that. You got to unpack that. Come on, that was too good for you to drop the mic on me. That's like gold.
Well, I'll speak through the lens that I'm here to speak through, that I work through now. You know, I remember preparing to go to college, and I was at a private school here in Atlanta, and so many counselors encourage students like us not to go to HBCUs because they say you want to have you want to have diversity, you want to have a diverse experience. And then I get to somewhere like Washington, D.C., and it's students from Africa, Trinidad and Tobago's, Chicago. And I learned that we are not monolithic. Therefore, diversity is a representation of a non-monolithic echelon of individuals, if you will. And that is a variation of exposure, class, all the things, right? But I think that with the way it's buzzing right now, we tend to think of it as color. But we as a people aren't monolithic. Right. So we can have someone at a company and still not be represented as a people. So that's my diversity portion. Equity is, you know, it's not pie. We're not taking your slice, right? So there's that mountain to climb, right? Inclusion to me, however, coming from an entrepreneurial background and a music industry background where publishing was the detrimental, ownership is key, because you can perform, but if you do not own, then you are just performing. And at the end of the day, the owners win. So for me, that equals inclusion. That's why I'm so pleased to hear you all discuss, you know, I'm at this company, I have ownership stakes. We're talking about different types of business dynamics. So that would be my spiel on that.
Right on. Thank you, sis. I love that. And thank you for challenging us too to recognize that there is diversity even within what would be apparently homogeneity, that there's an opportunity for us to recognize that we are not all the same, even if the tendency is to assume that when we talk about diversity, we do. I think you're absolutely right. People want to think in terms of colors. And if we've got a Black person here, then we've got Black people here. And that's absolutely not the case. Isaiah, interested in hearing your response to the same question. Sort of parsing those out: diversity, equity, inclusion. What you thinking?
Yeah, you know, and first I'd like to say I really appreciate how eloquent you were with that, you know, breakdown. And I think that's an important part to make. And to kind of kick off from that, you know, it's not just race, right? It's across religion, it's across gender, it's across sexual orientation, it's across all these different things, right? So I think about diversity as just the ability to have a collection of truly unique individuals. You know what I mean? Like if you're standing in a room and there's 10 people in the room and all of them are different, you know, across all the dimensions of humanity, you know, in some capacity is represented in that room, right? And so when I think about diversity, just to kind of frame it up real quick, that's what I think about. Now, when I think about equity, you know, it's really about having the ability. Ownership is definitely a piece of it, but I feel like it's also just almost a respect thing, right? Like if I'm talking and I'm not being heard, and I don't get to make decisions, and I don't get to participate, and I don't get to, you know, move the way that I want to move in the space, even though I've been included, you know, and I don't reap any of the benefits of my work, even though I've been included. You know what I mean? What is that, right? So equity is being able to see the fruits of your labor, right? To be able to receive the benefit of the activities that you're engaged in, right? So, you know, I'm looking for equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcome, right? So, you know, when I think about equity, that's what I think about. Inclusion to me is it seems like it would be the easiest, but I think it's the hardest to do because, you know, for most people, we're afraid of what we don't know. And if you don't allow yourself to meet new people and diversify your personal network, you know, then you're not able to be equitable, and then you don't, you know, include people. So it's about kind of, I think it's the beginning stages of how this process works. If you're not inclusive, nothing else happens. Diversity doesn't happen. You don't get the opportunity to be equitable. So And when you're including people, make sure to bring in a diverse background. And then when you have these diverse people that you've included into the room, make sure that everybody gets a piece or an opportunity, or at least their voice heard, or, you know, like a seat at the table, if I'd had to kind of dumb it down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think about it, you know, separately, trying to frame it up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Kev, what would you like to add, brother? Diversity, equity, inclusion. How do you define those three separate existence?
Let's see. Diversity, I would say diversity is kind of like when you look at the census, you look at the country is diverse.
Mm.
Our Olympic team is diverse.
Mm-hmm.
So I think diverse is when you have everybody. A lot of times when you hear somebody talk about diversity, it's from the majority culture's perspective.
Mm.
And it just means somebody that's not me.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a couple sprinkled in, you know, you have some black pepper in the mashed potatoes or something like that. And that's diversity. And then it's like a one and done.
Right.
But diversity is having everybody present,
Mm.
you know. Inclusivity, that means having people in the room at the table.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with just inclusivity, and we've probably all experienced it, you can be in the room, but when, say, the meeting's over, you're ushered out, you haven't had any impact, you haven't gotten to do anything, you have no say, you have no sphere of influence, right? And you don't get anything for your time. You just get some busy work, and then, you know, so bad, so sad, you go home. Equity, you have some power, you get to do something, and you get something for your labor. You have some ownership, you have that sphere of influence. You have to have all three for it to actually make a difference. There have to be some of everyone. You have to be in the room. You have to have some decision-making authority and some fruits for your labor when you exercise that authority, and be respected and listened to, which happens not the way it ought to. And not just in this industry, but in general. That's my take on it.
Absolutely. And Drew, no pressure on you, brother. We got they done preached already, man. You gotta close us out, brother. What do you think? Diversity.
I mean, how do I follow that?
Right.
No. Yeah, diversity, equity, inclusion. The way I see those two things, I mean, just along with what all the other panelists said, because obviously it's going to be another just take on all the good words we've already said already. But diversity, you know, that different lived experience, different backgrounds. I love how Inga said the monolith of what is, you know, Black people and that racial or ethnic identity, right? Like, and then how breaking out from that, right? Now I work in Colorado, so we don't have a lot of racial or ethnic diversity, but we have a lot of people that have moved here from different places. So I really I talk about those different lived experiences, those backgrounds, and how that diversity is also important in adding. And then also not looking at different racial or ethnic diversity just because it's not around, meaning it's not a monolith, right? So really, leaning into those lived experiences. By the way, I'm just very jealous. I'm not an HBCU grad. Every time y'all talk about it, just like, oh, I wish. So
we understand, Andrew.
I know. I was just talking to another friend about it. I'm like, oh, I wish I could but that's another thing, right? Like we haven't talked about it in my company yet, but if we're like, hey, how do we attract HBCU grads? I don't know, right? I'd have to reach out to Fenwick or Inga or things like that. And so it's not something that we all have, it's not something that, we aren't just a monolith. I love that you said that. And then we're looking at equity. I really focus on equitable processes, right? Equitable practices, and how are we making sure that we're not just thinking of our coworkers or the people in this industry in our community at the same level, because as we know with diversity, their lived experiences, their backgrounds are probably going to be different. And so we need to look at how do we make sure this is equitable? How are we bringing them in? How are we welcoming them in an equitable way instead of just thinking our whole community has that same experience? And then with inclusion, rounded out, I mean, like everyone's been saying, kind of like bringing it up, making that spot at the table. a friend was telling me about this quote, and I wish I remembered who it was from. But basically, the quote was talking about when you're making decisions without us, about us, it's not for us. And so it's kind of like that's part of the inclusion is like, hey, we need to make sure we have inclusion there. So that way, those decisions, whatever community or demographic we're working on, that we can do it right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate all that y'all have had to contribute to that, man. Thank y'all for helping to frame this up. I'm gonna pivot now that we've sort of got a bit of a working definition, or at least everybody's had a chance to speak into what they mean when they say diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm gonna ask each of you now, and I'm gonna mix it up and maybe start with Isaiah. Ask you to give me some examples where you've seen DEI principles put into practice successfully as you've been paying attention and sort of monitoring developments in this space. Like what are some best practices that we can recognize that some folks are putting into practice, either within our industry or outside of our industry, such that we can establish a list of practices, right? Like sort of learnings that can be shared across breweries inside of the craft space.
Yeah, so I thought a lot about this question, and what I came to was that I'm not really seeing it anywhere. Straight up, I'm not seeing what I want to see. What I think needs to occur. I'm seeing a lot of energy. I'm seeing a lot of this buzzword. I'm seeing a lot of guilt. I'm seeing a lot of opportunity to chase profit and open up a new market. I'm seeing a lot of different things, but I'm not seeing, in my opinion, a successful execution of what this looks like at scale. And what really got me going on this is I'm a supply chain background, been in the industry for over a decade. And so when you talked about Inga diversifying the supply chain, that was definitely, one of the ideas that I keep trying to push. And what was so funny about that, we do diversity well with products, with material things, with you think about Amazon, you can get whatever you want off Amazon. You can get it from anywhere across the world, 2 days. So we do a great job of diversifying our supply chain with products. We do a terrible job of diversifying our supply chain with people. And I think, there's a lot of reasons for that, none which we don't have to get in today. But I think the solution to this is infrastructure, and it's about really empowering those who are not yet at the table with the ability to, number one, get a seat at the table, and then number two, realize the benefit of being in the space, like all the way, uncensored, unfiltered. So, a couple of different examples I think about Garrett Oliver and what he's doing with his foundation, how he's training people and providing scholarships for people, of color, minorities, all this type of stuff to go get educated in the field. I think about what Dr. J and her program is doing. It's really about creating infrastructure to go into our communities and educate us about the opportunities that exist here. So, you don't have to be a doctor to work at a hospital, right? Like when we think about a hospital, we think, oh, okay, well, I got to have a PhD. Nah, they got a marketing team, they got an accounting team, they got, somebody selling equipment, it's a broad, wide field, right? And it takes all kinds. They got people running forklifts in the warehouse. So, to get to the root of it, I think we have to do a few things. One is create infrastructure for ownership and empowerment amongst the minorities, right? Amongst the people that we're trying to bring diversity into. And the second, I think, is to create education in our community to show that you don't have to be a beer drinker to want to get into this industry. You don't have to be, a person who wants to brew. You can be a scientist. You can be so many different things. So I think it's important for us to look at how other industries advertise what they do and attract talent and retain talent. And then, it's a pipeline. So us going back and building those pipelines in this industry and starting as early as K through 12, right? Brewing is STEM. It's science and math. I think about the JROTC and how when I was in high school, they would come in and, they'd have a little table and they'd set you up and they'd tell you, hey, you want to, do this in the military? This is all kind of this cool stuff going on. Well, how come breweries can't, set up situations like that on a college campus? It's really just about getting into the community and educating, and I think creating that pipeline and then laying out that infrastructure for those people to be educated to be successful. So
Indeed.
those are my thoughts.
Isaiah went ahead and anticipated my follow-up question to this question and started answering that one. And I'm tempted to go straight to that one, but so as not to miss an opportunity, I do want to ask everybody, in case there are some successful examples that any of you have seen of DEI in practice, and whether or not they're like as successful as they will eventually be, or do you see anything that gives you hope, or inside of which you see, or about which you see promise for DEI in practice inside of this industry or outside of this industry? Maybe let's go, Inga. Anything you're seeing on the horizon that you feel encouraged by?
I'm building it, and I'm encouraged by that. I think we're at a very pivotal moment in society, and so I stand with you, Isaiah. So the company that I'm with is a Black tech startup, EdFarm. They started out with K through 12 tech education initiatives. And then the second iteration is HBCUs. You're absolutely right. So one of the pillars that I'm designing is agricultural technology. We have social justice, we have Propel Health, we have all of these things. But in ag tech specifically, we've been heavily focused on industrial hemp and the full supply chain. Just in short, that's research and development, that's genetics, that's, all of those things. But to hear you say that this industry is agricultural means that the pipeline starts K through 12. There are laboratories, ag departments. We have an entire corridor of Black talent that needs you. And in order to push them or drive them, or not even push or drive, but let them know that this is a professional option for them, then that intentional reach out and pipeline infrastructure has to be in place. So what I'm saying is, while we're in a space where we have major industry interested, and not just interested, donating to aggregated efforts like the one that I'm with in a major and long-term way, and not just financially, but with ongoing mentorships, paid internships. I think that for craft is part of the solution. It's like extract the STEM out of it, program that into K through 12 education and HBCU curricula, if you will, and then you drive that talent to you. And I think Andrew said it earlier, part of being successful at this is knowing what we don't know, or recognizing what we don't know how to do, and say, I should reach out. I don't know much about brewing. Let me reach out to you and download this to me, make it make sense to me in STEM language, and then extrapolating that, taking it and applying it to my work, which is standing with Apple and Southern Company and adding a technological component to it. So I think part of equity is exchange. And if we don't exchange the privileges of the seats in which we sit, then what is the point of the seat at the table? And secondly, a seat at the table is one thing, but without the preparedness and the skill set and the proper training for the workforce of the future, what are we doing? So it would be beneficial, to know, what does the future of the industry look like? What are the necessary skill sets for that workforce of the future? And how do you design the models to train for that? And then you just directly pipeline, because one thing's for sure, we're underrepresented in each thing you're going to talk about tonight. So there's a necessary pipeline in every component. So that's what I think. I'm more of, I think we are in a position now to design through collaboration, the solution, as opposed to, this isn't working, this was great, they hire a D&I person and check the box.
Right.
And what we're saying through all of our collective efforts is, that's not enough. Right. That's compliance, right? But it's not innovation and it's not progress. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you all so much, the two of you. And I'm going to go ahead and just yield and recognize that we are talking into the space. And I think it's probably the better question for me to be asking, right? Like, what is it going to take for craft to become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive? What I'm hearing from the first two respondents, right, is like, we have to be actively involved in building the bridge to get us to where we want to be. So rather than talking about what's currently underway, which we're recognizing as insufficient, I'm going to ask Andrew and Kevin for you to chime in to the question and answer the question. What is it going to take for us to get there? Seeing what you two have seen, and maybe Kevin, I'll start with you, right? Like you identified being the brown person showing up in some of these spaces, right? Like what is it going to take for us to transform this industry into the one that we would like to see?
Well, I would say, like, based on what I'm hearing, it's very similar to the kind of things I think have to happen. Like, I feel like I'm kind of lucky because I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. Well, Johnson C. Smith is right here in town, right? And one of the things I've actually been talked about with some of the guys I work with is us literally reaching out to the campus, because there's people there that have the kind of skills or are working towards the kind of skills that we would need in this industry, right? We're participating in the Many Faces Initiative like I described, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing we have to do. There's nothing to keep us from reaching out beyond that. There's also, I can't remember the name of the company right now. It's Bright Spot or something, but it's Hugh McCall and a gentleman from Duke Energy, but they've started a sort of a venture capital mentoring fund. It's just getting started, specifically to help to mentor, provide capital, and help incubate and cultivate people of color, and to help increase that mind share and equity for, you know, people of color and their businesses, you know, things like that. And that's just getting started. And it's specifically to increase that percentage, to increase that footprint. And it's not just the money. It's the mentorship, it's the knowledge base. And then that equity and that ownership gets turned back over to them as opposed to being held by that venture fund. You know, I mean, things like that. That's really a big deal, because I mean, dude pretty much made Bank of America what it is now. You know, so it's not like he doesn't know how to, you know, make something happen.
Right.
Things along that nature, especially that knowledge transfer, that's the important part. You know, when you can get somebody that's willing to give you that knowledge base, when, as we know, sometimes getting the knowledge that you want, that can be an impediment, because having been in business, you know, people are not always willing to.
You're on mute, Kev. You just got muted. There we go.
New laptop, the button's down here, and it shouldn't be. But yeah, you know, sometimes people are not as open to sharing the actual knowledge as they ought to be. So that knowledge transfer, that is definitely needed. And those are some of the things that I'm seeing right now that I think are going to help us out.
Right on. Andrew, you get to close us out again, brother. What is it going to take? Like, what is it going to take for craft beer to become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive?
Man, this is what I go to bed thinking about. Wake up, you know. Well, not you know. I try not to take my work home, but oh wait, yeah, this is my work. So, I think about it quite a lot. If you could go, I a lot of times break it down into two different areas, right? I break it down into kind of the craft beer industry right now, right? Like, what can the craft beer industry do? And then the other area is, how do we attract more diverse populations and demographics into craft beer too, right? I see them as two different ways, and I see, you know, people working on both sides, from the craft beer industry side or the craft side. I see it isn't, you know, as Inga was saying, like checking a box. It isn't just, you know, the compliance. You need to have the culture, the company, the leadership, a position focused on DE&I, but then you also need like the little things, right? The intentionality in every process and every practice to really be thinking about how to make this more equitable, how to make this more inclusive. How are we being intentional about looking for more diverse populations? So on the craft side, it's not one thing. It's not a couple things. It's not just, you know, a few statements and a hire. It's really diving down to the processes, from supply chain. Hey, where are we getting our hops? All right. Oh, where are we getting our merchandise? Are we using a local vendor? Or hey, what's that local vendor support? You know, it's looking at those things. It's even from, you know, the language we use on social media or things like that, all of it has to be thought about and looked about. Product development, R&D, all the little things. And then the other side, I see work of attracting the different demographics, the different populations into what craft is, and that it is community, right? And that it ideally at best it's community. And then we need to be able to build that. And part of that on that craft beer side is, hey, we need to make sure there's representation, right? And then representation, interest, pipeline, right? Making sure we're getting into education, making sure that we're being seen, that this industry is for everyone. This is for, you know, people that don't just look like the typical craft beer drinkers, but that this industry has a lot of different jobs, as Isaiah said. And so I really respect the work of the folks getting out there and driving, especially the black folks, black population, trying to get them in there. Crown and Hops, Black Beer Traveler,
Weather Souls,
right? Yeah, I mean, they're out there getting the populations interested in, like, hey, this is a really great place to build community, and we're gonna keep building this. So
yeah. I want to ask this, and Andrew, I'm gonna jump back on you and shoot right back at you, because I know we've talked a little bit, and Inga sort of highlighted, right? Like, one of our challenges is that many of the folks in our space are approaching DEI as a box to check, as a compliance measure to satisfy, right? So when we're thinking about and recognizing the challenge of kind of overcoming that perception, I tend to think about, you know, sometimes it's all right to get somebody to do the right thing for the wrong reason. So like, if we were going to have conversations with folks who are running breweries, who are perhaps hesitant to step in, to wade into these waters, right? Like, if you were going to try to make the case to them as to why this is important, like, what would you articulate to them? What is the ROI on D&I, right? Like, what can they expect? Because sometimes, like, these folks are driven by numbers, right? It's like, look, man, this makes good business sense too, right? Yeah. So like, how do we make that case to folks who haven't yet bought into this idea because of the altruistic aspects of it? How do we make the business case to them for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is. And you know, as far as how do we make the business case, what do you say to those stakeholders? I'm going to quote Jen Price on this. One of our first meetings, Jen was talking about getting Crafted for Action set up. She said, you know, we're going to start ugly, and then we're going to see what happens. And I love that term, and how you kind of have to start from something that you might not think is going to be the end, but you have to start it. You have to start somewhere. And so I love that. And so that's what I would tell leadership breweries. It's not going to be pretty. You're going to have a lot of different iterations. It's going to change, probably some tears, you know, things like that. But the benefit is what we're talking about, that diversity, those different lived experiences, that mindset, those are going to bring a lot of ideas in. And there's been a lot of studies, multiple studies done. I usually quote one from Harvard Business Review that I've read, but more diverse leadership teams and more diverse teams in general, but leadership teams specifically. And they look at a few different background or types of diversity, you know, national origin, gender, age, background, professional background. But it shows that with more diverse leadership teams, the result is higher levels of innovation and higher levels of EBITDA, so cash flow. So basically, the business case is, do you like money, right? Like, do you like money, right? Like, because at the end of the day, you're going with a more diverse team, with more of these different lived experiences and backgrounds, so the professional or personal or social, you're going to get some different ideas. And in this game, in the craft game, if you're not innovating, you're dying. And so you need that type of input of different ideas and experiences to keep innovating. Because if we keep hiring just people who like craft beer, and we're going to keep making dope double IPAs. And I get it, but we're not going to find different ways to do those things. And so business cases, hey, if we're going to continue, if we're going to keep innovating, this is what we got to do.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Inga, I'm going to volley it back to you. What's the ROI for DEI and the ways that you're communicating it with some of the companies that you're preparing your students to enter?
I must share that it has been not as difficult as one would assume. The state of the world and this nation have placed the necessity of corporations choosing with whom and for what they stand. And so it's almost, my mom is from Savannah, so pardon my Geechee-isms, but it's as if the ancestors have assembled on the battlefield in tandem with us and said, you know, so my thing is, it's in asking, it's not an ask, it's a necessity. And I think Kevin said it comes down to numbers, right? And education, it comes down to KPIs, key performance indicators. So I think two things through my lens work in tandem. One, what's bad for business? What's bad for business is exclusion, right? What's good for business is preparedness and ongoing. To me, diversity and inclusion is an act. It's not a word. So if you're not actually developing the infrastructure, you are just having people are just having conversations. And so one of my major takeaways from tonight that I'm over the moon about is that craft is STEM. And that gets my brain going because like, oh, there's a tech component. Okay, so that means there's baby brewers and they can, you know, I absorb the terminology and expertise from people like you, but the formula is the same. Train, K through 12, push to whatever educational ecosystem works for that student. And again, I will stand on the mountaintop and say, every HBCU is not for every student, but there is an HBCU for every single student. And so there's something special about coming home and being trained and made to serve your community with obligation. And so we need to capitalize on that skill set of these students who've done more with less and plug them into industry that they don't know exists. And then you have industry placement deliverables on the other end. So again, it's not an ask. I do pitch every day, but the success rate indicates that partners desire to effectuate the multiplier effect. They want to see things that help many, right? So what do we have? Over 100 HBCUs. There's your many. Okay. What else y'all want to do? Ongoing equity. Great. Let's design it. You know. So as for me, I think it is about how do you connect industry to program. See, that's the language they understand, not what we think, but what do the metrics say? What's the rubric? What is it? What are the numbers? Students that have access to blank are more likely to do what? Blank. That's put that down and put the writing on the wall. How undiverse is your industry? How bad is it? Start there. I can guess because every space I've been researching, we don't have it anywhere in any pillar. So I think it's not an ask. It is our preventive maintenance for sustainability. And they can take the note of other corporations who have not taken that stance as of yet. And I don't know the numbers, but I'm certain that our consumerism of the industry is relevant because it's relevant everywhere. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's growing. It is absolutely trending upwards. I will say that. And Isaiah, I think you might have. I saw you reaching to unmute yourself. I'm gonna go ahead on and give you the floor, brother. What you got to add?
Well, I mean, yes, and you know, so all those things, man. And I've just had such a good time tonight chatting with you guys. This is awesome. I want to say there's been a lot of gems dropped tonight, and as I was listening to everybody go, I was looking down at the screen, and we have more than a buzzword putting the DEI principles into practice, moving across. So the ROI, I'm gonna get tactical. The ROI for companies trying to do this, survival. Okay, let's not mince words. It's survival. Okay, and in this industry specifically, as craft beer starts to tighten up and sales start to slow down, it's survival, right? You need to make more innovative products. They're gonna touch a broader base and get more market share than you have right now. That's the ROI. Now, I'm talking to two different people, two different groups. The first part, I think I'm talking to guys and girls like me at Our Culture Brewing, as a person entering the space, as an owner trying to make that 1% larger. The only way we're going to do this, we got to work together. We have to collaborate. Okay, competition is not the thing on the forefront of your mind when you are 1% of a market.
Right.
Collaboration is. We need to collaborate to build infrastructure. And to Inga's point, it starts in our community in grade school, right? And so basically what we got to do is we got to take care of each other, man. We got to help each other. We got to share information. We got to share resources. We got to build. We have to take our talents and turn it inward to our communities, and we have to build. If you a farmer, if you a scientist, if you an accountant, if whatever you're doing in your day job, you can do that in your community. So that's the first step. Figure out a way to own it so you can ensure that equity transfers to you, and go out there and build you a business and impact your community in a meaningful way. Help others, collectivize. Okay, so now I'm talking to the existing infrastructure. Get out the way. That's first off. Get out the way, right? There's no need to be scared of new entrants into the market, right? And what you should really be doing is helping the people who are trying to build to diversify by rolling up your sleeves and helping them build, right? The same goes true for you. Don't think about competition, think about collaboration. Because what's going to happen is you have no idea how to get into this market. You have no idea how to expand your market share and figure out how to keep your business from trending down, right? Because if you did, you'd be doing it. So the reality is the solution comes from collaboration, is how it all breaks down. And for the existing infrastructure, you have to let new people into the space to offer different ideas to generate that innovation. And when you allow new people into the space, you have to compensate them equitably, you know, whether that's through employment or through helping another business grow. So when I think about an existing brewery, I think about internships, I think about mentorships, I think about, I think about the Craft Brewers Guild for every state. You know, how are the Craft Brewers Guilds working together to diversify the industry? Is the Brewer Association is working with the Craft Brewers Guild? Is the Master Brewers Association working with the Guild? Like, how are we all not trying to fix this problem, right? And it starts by you rolling up your sleeves and diversifying your pipeline. You don't see talent, build talent. That's what Garrett's doing with his foundation. That's what Dr. J's doing, right? There are no excuses. So to get really tactical here, if you're me, you build it and you work with your community to see it realized. If you're outside looking in the existing infrastructure, you help. And I think what we have to realize is there's enough food on the table for everybody to eat. But one thing's for sure, it's going nowhere if we don't work together.
Yes, indeed. We have only about 6 minutes left, and I absolutely want to hear from you, Kev. So I'm going to have you start us off with the answer to this final question. And unfortunately, we're going to have to divide these last 6 minutes between the four of y'all. So this is going to be a quick one. But in light of what we've talked about and the importance of building that pipeline, and again, this is like a tip of the hat to you, Inga, and the work that you're doing with Propel and setting up HBCU students for potential opportunities in this industry and others. Asking the three of you brothers in particular, if you had the opportunity to speak back to college age you about the opportunity and the upside that exists in this industry that you're now standing inside of, what would be the message that you would deliver? And I'm asking us to do this because I anticipate, and Inga, I saw you sent your email address to Kevin. I done copied it too, because I'm like, I think all of us will be reaching out to find ways to get students involved in the work that we're doing. So I'm giving us a chance to almost prepare our stump speeches for those students. What is the message that you would like for those HBCU students rising and matriculating through these colleges to know about the opportunities that exist for them inside of our industry? Kev, would you mind answering first?
I would say think creatively, especially if you're in the science disciplines, because I was IT for 23 years, and yeah, I do IT even at the site of Remetery. I had no clue I was going to be doing this much chemistry and biology, all of that stuff every day, chemistry, biology, computers, all of that stuff, every bit of it. There's accounting, business. Every discipline that you can think of,
Mhm.
you do in this industry.
Mhm.
Supply chain, all of that is encapsulated in this industry. And it's a win-win situation because you also spend a lot of time with sensory training
Mhm.
and tasting. So you get a little bit of that too to calm yourself down after a rough day. 1,000-gallon tank as a blowout like mine did today, which is why I was wearing the hat when I got online.
Yeah.
So that's my statement.
Yeah. Andrew, what about you, brother? What would you say to college age Andrew about the opportunities that lie ahead in this industry?
I think I would say, hey, you know what? This it's a cool industry. There's a lot of ways to get in. There's a lot of different ways you can cut your teeth before, during, through, and after to get into this industry. Build your network. Hey, if you enjoy this now, 21-year-old Andrew, you enjoy this now, that's great. Find some other people that do too. If not, introduce some people because that network is important. This industry is fun, but it's new. You know, we have a lot of ideas out there. So the bigger you can build your network across maybe where people will go, different industries they're going to do, and maybe jump back in. Build that network because you can't do this by yourself. You can't.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. And the Right Reverend Isaiah Smith, we're going to get you to round us out, brother. What would you say to these HBCU students passing through the Propel? How do you get them engaged and excited about stepping in the craft?
I would say the first thing is find a mentor. I would say the second thing is you only fail when you quit. And the third thing I would say, it is what you want it to be. Like you can make it, you are going to shape it into the future that you desire. And don't be afraid of that.
Right on. And Inga, I realize you're not speaking from the perspective of the industry, but based on what you've heard, like what message could you deliver to your students to try to encourage them to entertain the possibility of stepping in?
A lot of our students in the ecosystem, our institutions have done a phenomenal job with fewer resources, producing, the top number of PhDs. Our judges, our attorneys, our educators, we know that. We come from that. Even those of us who did not go to HBCUs, we come from people who did. But a lot of these students are entrepreneurially driven, right? And they have that mindset. So I encourage the students to contemplate the business behind the products they love. That everything that they pick up, drink, there's an entire industry and business behind what you consume, because part of our obligation is to shift our power in consumerism to our power in business. And so when you can speak to students young and they contemplate that, they're like, wait, I didn't know I could work in craft. Like they have a marketing department. I like market, and how to differentiate the application of your gifts. Where will you serve? And the power of our ecosystem is not just where will you serve, when will you return home and serve community? And so I think the craft industry is perfect because one thing I've observed is the community nature feel of it, plus the alchemy and the science, but encouraging our students, they need to see brothers that look like you. They need to speak with you. They need to engage with you. They need to know that they can apply their chemistry skills, et cetera, in the space. And then they have hope because of the actual representation of diversity and not the buzzword. They see you doing it. They want to emulate it. So I think that is step one. And I'm happy to assist.
What I think I hear you saying is that this panel is going to be reconvened by Propel at a future date for a group of students coming through your program. That's what I think I heard you say. I might have projected that onto you, but I think
is that what's happening? Okay,
that's what I think needs to happen. I think this group right here, this has been a fantastic discussion, man. I'm so grateful to be. I feel like the spirit has been all over this thing right here. I'm so glad to have had a chance to be a part of this with y'all. We do have a few minutes left, and before we leave, I want to make sure we give the people who are tuned in an opportunity to understand how they might be able to contact us. So maybe if we could do one last pass through And if you wouldn't mind just sharing your contact information for any of the folks who are tuned in, who might have been inspired by something that's been said and would like to contact any of you for future conversations. We'll start with Isaiah and work our way around the horn.
You can go to ourculturebrewing.com and contact us there. My direct email is isaiah@ourculturebrewing.com. And look, let's work. Hit me up. I'm gonna hit you back. Let's work.
Indeed. Kev, go ahead and give everybody your contact info.
All right. You can get us goodroadcider.com, and I'm Kevin at goodroadcider.com. Talk to me. I'm here.
Right on, Andrew.
Hey, yeah, Andrew Magana. So you kind of see it at the bottom of the screen. Andrew Magana is just one word, no spaces, no punctuation, at odellbrewing.com. Andrew Magana at odellbrewing.com. Come visit us out in Colorado. We got a few locations. Come see us.
And Inga.
I'm Inga Willis on LinkedIn. Reach me there because I'm about that business. Thank you.
Indeed. Well, I am Fenwick at ccbeerco.com. I am not on LinkedIn. I guess I better get about that business. I'm going to follow the lead of my sister. Thank y'all so much, man. This conversation has been fantastic. I'm so grateful to have a chance to connect with y'all. I'm looking forward to seeing y'all all in the flesh at some point very soon. Kev, I don't know if you're planning on going to CBC, or Isaiah, if y'all gonna be up there, but I think everybody's gonna be heading up to White People Wakanda up in Denver for Craft Brewers Conference this year. So if anybody's planning on being up there, I look forward to seeing y'all up there. And Inga, I'm definitely gonna be reaching out to you, sis, because we are building a paid internship program right now that we're hoping to launch spring of next year. And I would absolutely love to be in conversation with you to make sure that we're doing that in a way that's gonna be appealing to students. So look forward to hearing from me very, very soon.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to telling my team that craft is STEM tomorrow.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. Look, I'm going to quote Dr. J, give you a quote, even better one. Dr. J has famously said, and I think she was tuned in a little while ago, but I've heard Dr. J say that there is opportunity for people in craft with everything from a GED to a PhD. And I think that is absolutely the case. That is the breadth of opportunity available for folks inside of this industry. So we are hoping to get more and more of us working in this space, owning in this space, and participating in the growth and benefiting from the wealth that's being generated here. So thank y'all so much. Shouts out to Jen Price for pulling this together, man, this whole conference.
She's a FAMU rattler. She's a FAMU rattler. She's
FAMU. Come on now, come on.
She's HBCU excellence.
I didn't even know that. Come through, Jen Price.
As well as Bethune-Cookman. She's dual degreed to
Lord.
HBCUs. That's our excellence.
All right.
I'm here to represent.
I'm saying you out here with it, sis.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much. And thank you, Michelle, for setting us up on this evening for this conversation. And thank everybody who tuned in. This has been fantastic. Glad to have been a part of it. And, best to everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference. All right, y'all.